Mr. Garfield Burford, Director of News and Current Affairs at ABS. On our panel today, we're honored to have the Honorable E.P. Chet Green, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Barbuda Affairs, Ambassador Aubrey Webson, Permanent Representative of Antigua and Barbuda to the United Nations, Mr. Bruce George Goodwin, our ambassador in Cuba, and Professor Justin Robinson of the UE5 Islands campus. This promises to be a very interesting discussion. Mr. Burford, I hand it over to you.
Ambassadors and other diplomats, ladies and gentlemen all, pleasant afternoon to you. How was lunch? Lunch was good? Perfect, excellent. Let's also welcome our audience online. ABS Television and Radio is carrying live coverage of this most important panel. So we welcome our audiences who are joining us in this country, across the region and beyond. We thank the Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for introducing this panel discussion. Diplomats perform a crucial role. You are on the vanguard of handling delicate matters of foreign policy and state. That's why Robert Frost said, a diplomat is a man who always remembers a woman's birthday but never remembers her age. You, of course, are dealing with crucial and sensitive matters, and none more crucial perhaps than this one. It is not hyperbole to say that we are witnessing a tectonic shift in the geopolitical landscape, one that is shaking the foundations of the post-World War II architecture. A timeless and sagacious African proverb is apt in these circumstances. When elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. And we in this region are expected to be bigly affected unless major trading partners can learn the art of the deal. Now this panel aims to unpack some of the policies either being proposed by the Trump administration in the US or are already implemented. It will also explain that we are not sitting ducks, we're not helpless pawns who have no agency. We in this country and this region can help to adjust the sails in the ship of state to assist in avoiding the worst storms, even if there is no safe harbor to be found. I remind everyone of the powerful words of Brutus and Julius Caesar. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures. The great words of Brutus in one of the greatest plays that William Shakespeare ever written, Julius Caesar. And we are on such a full sea at this point. We are at an inflection point, and so our esteemed panelists will unpack some of these issues for us. The main issues on the table: the proposed U.S. trade representative fine on Chinese-built ships docking at U.S. ports, the implications for us in this country and the region, the 25% tariff on countries purchasing Venezuelan oil or gas, meaning that any attempts to resurrect the Petrocaribe deal may be dead on arrival, the proposed policy being considered by which would impose visa restrictions on countries in this region which operate citizenship by investment programs, a consideration, we understand, the increased tariffs and counter-tariffs around the world which are feared could lead to a full-blown global trade war, and how Antigua and Barbuda could become collateral damage in this, or suffer collateral damage. And the one dominating the headlines across the region, the threat of expanded visa restrictions over the Cuban Medical Brigade and countries which use the services of the Cuban Medical Brigade. So without any further ado, again, let's remind you of the panel, a most distinguished and erudite panel. To my immediate left is Antigua Barbuda's permanent representative to the United Nations, His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Aubrey Webson.
Sorry, could you go back? I'm just finishing up something.
Sure.
Could you let me go?
Yes, just introducing you, Ambassador. So, of course, His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Aubrey Webson, Permanent Representative to the United Nations. To Ambassador Webson's left is the Distinguished Minister for Foreign Affairs, Trade and Barbados Affairs, Honorable E.P. Chet Green. To Minister Green's left is His Excellency Ambassador George Goodwin, Antigua Barbados Ambassador to the Republic of Cuba. And to Ambassador Goodwin's left is Professor C. Justin Robinson, Principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Five Islands campus. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause, please, for our distinguished panel. So without any further ado, may I ask the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Trade and Barbados Affairs, and two of those portfolios, Foreign Affairs and Trade, are appropriate in this context. May I ask Minister Green to open the batting on a very sticky wicket. Minister Green, over to you.
Thank you, Garfield. And I'm better known for fast bowling than for batting. And so as a fast bowler, I would not mind bowling a sticky wicket. But I wish to echo your sentiments vis-a-vis the importance of this topic, this discussion. Very timely, and I'm sure with the able assistance of the other panelists, we could bring some perspective and certainly some hope to the Antigua Barbudan people, because these are unique challenges. We operate in a very complex landscape, and the issue before us, which we just spoke about yesterday, the host, moderator of today's panel discussion, tariff war, or tariffs seemingly mounting into a trade war, the excessive pressure being placed on our Caribbean civilization, which will impact trade, impact health, it impacts about everything. Because if you take, for example, as a first issue, the imposition of tariffs on manufactured goods or goods and services out of countries with which we trade, either direct or indirectly, you will see immediately the knock-on effect on cost of living. Every day, as a member of government, I can show you that we try to peel back these realities to see just how much we can cushion the effects of this current day madness. I know ABS is carrying live, and I've been asked to be very diplomatic in my pronunciations and pronouncements. But I think at the same time I owe it to the Antigua Barbuda public, those viewing and listening, and to our diplomats, to fashion this in a way which helps us understand, as best we can, the enormity of the challenges we face. And unless we are prepared to deal with this matter in a frontal way, we can find ourselves in some sticky positions, again borrowing from the sticky wicket on which I'm now operating. And so the tariff situation, I gave an example just this week on a radio program with a young Antiguan who bottles sea moss. And he buys his bottles from China. Even the 25% tariff placed on those bottles, you see the first problem for this young entrepreneur. If that 25% is compounded by the bottle being brought into the region by Chinese registered vessels, he can almost kiss his business goodbye. It means for every instance that we see that kind of development, if development can be called, we understand the impact on cost of living and this inflation, this imported inflation. Mark you, in some ways, this narrative allows people, all people, to understand that this is not a political issue. Because there are many persons who try to politicize this. Any government in this or any other Caribbean country dependent on imports, that we do, will have to go through navigating these problems because they're real. And so if we take that CMOS vendor or entrepreneur as an example, and we look across the entire landscape of Antigua Barbuda or business sector, food imports, garment imports, vehicle imports, all those things we import, you can see immediately just how this will affect life in our country. Let's take another view of the tariffs. This country depends very heavily on remittances. If those tariffs, as they already are, worsen the conditions of life for our citizens living in North America, then remittances become affected. And so it's a whole circle and cycle of things that we need to examine and be aware of where this is concerned. If the tariffs bite the American economy, then that which we all live by in Antigua Barbuda, I mean tourism, that's not affected. Because if people have less disposable income, then travel becomes something that we'll have to consider and think twice about. And so if we don't have the economies in the North American space or in European space, because it's not only a North American situation, there's a global crisis that we're staring down, we're looking at. And so if this affects the travel trade, it means we are further impacted in Antigua Barbuda because our economy is predicated on tourism. If the tariffs bite to the extent that raw materials and shipping costs are affected, as they are certainly sure to do, then again, it adds to the reality of our challenges or problems. And so I don't want us to allow ourselves to be caught in this discussion with political dark lenses, but rather be very clear as to what we're looking at and how it affects us or how it is going to affect us going forward. You have that tariff situation compounded now by the Cuban health workers situation. Every one of us in this room know and agree that without the Cuban health workers in our system, our health system will simply crash. We are that reliant on the Cuban professionals. And it will be a long time, maybe not in our collective lifetimes, that we'll see the development of Antiguan medical talent to the extent that we will not need to have Cubans or others intertwined with local talent to manage our health services. I see the US Secretary of State walking back, tiptoeing around, and I'm hoping by the time the conversation ends, we will have somewhat of a reasonable, respectable position which recognizes the dependence on Caribbean countries on this very important regime, bilateral regime between Cuba and our respective countries. Because it is work in progress, and because seemingly it is happening in our favor, I will just be optimistic, but ask that we all as ambassadors, diplomats, keep our eyes on that space, understanding the importance of the Cuban medical brigades in our medical services system. I missed some of this morning's presentation from the CIU, but I'm sure that you will all read up overnight on the EU's concerns about our CIP programs. That is compounded by the US having their own problems. And so this again is another area we have to keep our eyes, another space we need to keep our eyes on to see what really will emerge. The CIP is a non-tax regime, which is very, 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 and I could spend the rest of the afternoon saying very, for emphasis, very important to our economic development and even survival. We know our citizens are not fond of the word taxes. But more importantly, we pride ourselves in operating a program that is respectful, responsible, and certainly which takes into account our membership of the global community. Very important. We are not in the business of facilitating through the CIP program persons who are non-desirables or persons who have criminal backgrounds and records. Our due diligence system, which is supported by international partners, confirms and guarantees the integrity of our program. But it is clear that some countries just do not like the idea of the competition that we present. A very competitive space. Canada have their own program, US their own program, Europe their own programs, but the only program that is set upon is the one in the Caribbean. We have to, as diplomats, as members of the diplomatic service, be seized with information. I want to implore each of you to, with regularity, check in with Ms. Donovan and Ambassador Hadid and the team at the CIU for updates on this program, so that you in your respective jurisdictions, your respective posts overseas, can speak with authority and knowledgeably on exactly what is happening with not only CIP programs globally or in the region, but more so what is happening here in Antigua Barbuda with our own program. As I said, unique challenges in a complex landscape. We are called upon to negotiate, we are called upon to engage, and certainly I believe that after this afternoon's encounter, we will have tools in our arsenal with which to negotiate and certainly deal with the issues that come to us or come to our attention as representing Antigua Barbuda and its interests. I will leave this as my opening comment and allow for the other members of the panel to make their opening salvos. The wicket, in fact, is sticky.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause, please, for Minister for Foreign Affairs, Trade and Barbuda Affairs, Honorable E.P. Chet Green, negotiating very difficult batting conditions today. But the entire region is battling these conditions, and if we needed diplomats at a more crucial time, now could not have been a more crucial time for us to need the services of those in this room, or ambassadors and high commissioners who have been doing a fantastic job. And let me pause here for the audience to, including of course our diplomats, to applaud themselves for the work that they have been doing under very difficult conditions. A round of applause, please, for the tremendous work in all our overseas missions. That is why Winston Churchill said, diplomacy is the art of telling people to go to hell in such a way that they ask for directions. None other than Winston Churchill could have said that. Let's go now over to Ambassador Webson, Dr. Aubrey Webson, permanent representative to the United Nations, who will continue the batting lineup, I said in very difficult conditions. The ball is swinging, so Ambassador, over to you to navigate these very tough conditions. And Ambassador, of course, sits in New York and plays a crucial role in, of course, this country's diplomatic engagements. And of course, he would have distinguished himself in relation to how this country hosted the 2024 4th Conference in Small Island Developing States. Sits for a round of applause, please, for Ambassador Webson as he takes the microphone.
Thank you very much, Bradford. Honorable Minister, colleagues, I love cricket, or I used to love cricket. I know, so don't play it anymore, don't like it anymore, so, you know, the wicket doesn't matter anymore. I want to take this very interesting, very challenging topic this afternoon from the perspective of Antigua and Barbuda's relationship in the multilateral space. Because that's the space that I work in, and I've had a couple of experiences in the last 2 years or 3 that have been significant on this matter. Where we are today with the United States and with some of the shifting changes in Europe is not necessarily new. We walked down this road a few years ago, and we are seeing some of the same reoccurrences, maybe with a little bit more vigor because folks understand it better. But we also found ourselves caught in this road when Russia invaded Ukraine. It was similar. And we come into this with a little bit more understanding. Because today, though, what we are facing is really urgent. And we therefore have to ask ourselves as small islands, as Antigua, what do we stand on? We stand on the principles of international law. And that for us is critical because if we do not stand on the principles of international law in this current geopolitical challenge we face, then we have lost everything. As a small nation, when countries, as a small nation, multilateralism for us is not just a choice. It is a lifeline. It is an imperative. And therefore we have to stand on something to show that our effort on our emphasis and dependency on multilateralism is important. It is the diplomatic the diplomatic authority or the authority that we have to use when we are faced with these challenges. The importance here for us is not to get caught in the geopolitics that have now taken us down this road. If the United States as a partner has decided to look inwards, we know that historically we are fully aware, I'm sure all of us, that countries that look inwards cannot survive. And in the 21st century, it's not possible to look fully inwards. Ronald Reagan, who was a major architect of the United States conservative politics, spoke very boldly in 1984 when people were pushing him to have the United States look inwards, and spoke of the danger of looking inwards. And if he recognized that danger, we ought to be able to understand that no country in a world that has become so much more interdependent can stand. We as small states, a small island, can obviously get caught up in the whole discussion and fight between larger powers. That struggle of larger powers tends to push small island states into pockets, and because you find what end up happening is countries are called upon, countries form blocks, and those blocks are driven in directions. And whereas we are, as the CARICOM region, we are a small block if you meet or chip off of some blocks, what we have to do is work together. Antigua and Barbuda will not stand by itself. We have to stand together as a region because our voice must always work with the voices that seek consensus and recognize the principles of international law. I know there are some direct, specific things that affect us as a state, affects our diaspora, and affects our relationships because we are in many ways very dependent on partnerships with some of the big powers. We can't let that drive, we can't let that relationship drive the way we resolve our challenges on the international scene. We must stand with principles, because principles will, and standing in principled position would guide us and be to our benefit. In the instance, direct relationship with Cuba is one such principle. We stand with the United Nations Charter, and we cannot allow the powerful, the Prime Minister of Antigua, in a speech to the United Nations a few years ago, spoke about might is not right. And we have to stand on that principle. We stood on it in the invasion of Ukraine. We have to stand on it and continue to stand, because we have been standing in the challenges against Cuba and the challenges against Caribbean islands health system. These weakened position will damage our health, our social and economic system as much as it will damage the relationships we have. That's why for us, the only position we must hold is one that is firmly based on international law. So that in any international discussion, we must be speaking clearly on a position of principle. If we waver on our positions of principle, we only weaken ourselves. We can only have a voice in the international financial space, which we have been speaking of for the last several years, if we remain firm to our principled position based on the Charter of the United Nations, which is founded on the principles of international law. We can only make changes in the Security Council and get a space for small islands so that we too can have a voice in speaking about peace, in speaking about security, in speaking about development. We could only have that if we stand on principles. And this is the time when we cannot waver, and our leaders will know that for us to be able to beat back the challenges that we are now facing in the shifting alliances in geopolitics, we must hold firm to the UN Charter, and we must hold firm to the principles of international law. I'll stop there for now.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause, please, for Dr. Aubrey Webson, Antigua Barbuda's permanent representative to the United Nations. Ambassador Webson has been doing a fantastic job there, of course, mentioning that as a region, he says the need to stand together and also must stand on principle in any international fora. Of course, we should also indicate to our audiences as well that Ambassador Sir Ronald Sanders was unable to be here for this important occasion as well, because even more crucial and pressing matters have taken his attention as well in Washington. So Sir Ronald Sanders unable to be here for this one. All right, let's go now over to our next ambassador on the panel, and he is His Excellency Ambassador George Goodwin, who is this country's ambassador to the Republic of Cuba. Of course, there are two regional groupings that Antigua Barbuda shares membership with Cuba in, and those are, of course, the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America, People's Trade Treaty, or ALBA TCP, founded in 2004 by the late then presidents of Cuba and Venezuela, respectively. That's Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz and Hugo Chavez Frias, 2004. And there's also CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, in which this country has an alliance with Cuba as well. Of course, in addition to the fact that there's a Cuban Medical Brigade, which is in the headlines, there's also the decision taken by the Trump administration just merely a few days after the outgoing Biden administration had taken Cuba off the list of state sponsors of terrorism. The Trump administration signed an executive order immediately placing Cuba back on that list of state sponsors of terrorism. It's against this background that His Excellency Ambassador George Goodwin addresses us this afternoon. A round of applause, please, for him.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Burford. I would approach this topic in the question of the U.S.-Caribbean geopolitical relationship, paying particular emphasis with the Cuban crisis or the Cuban situation as it has developed over the years. I must start by saying that ever since the triumph of the Cuban Revolution in 1959, it was the foreign policy objective of the United States to get or to implement or to influence regime change. And all their actions up until this point had been directed towards a regime change in Havana, in Cuba. And from the very beginning, their action to implement or to impose an embargo against Cuba, which has virtually, or with intended to virtually paralyze the function of Cuba and its relations in Latin America and the Caribbean. And they sought to isolate Cuba from all these regional and hemispherical activities. I have to note here that Cuba was very much isolated by their own their fellow Latin American countries until CARICOM, or at that time it was the 4 independent states of the Caribbean, Eastern Caribbean, English-speaking countries, that had begun to lift this isolation against Cuba when they agreed to have diplomatic relations with Cuba. And so, from that very time, the Caribbean, English-speaking Caribbean in particular, have been seen as the ones who have brought Cuba out of isolation. But no, they continued to have this embargo, and I don't think people understand the effect of the embargo. Every time I'm asked a question or people are saying, how is it that things in Cuba are so bad? I don't think that they understand the effect of the embargo that the United States has on Cuba. It doesn't only affect trade, it is to the point where if your company is operating, for instance, a boat, a ship, and that ship takes any goods to Cuba, and it is registered in the States or it has business in the States, that registered boat or ship cannot return to the United States for any kind of business. So, in the first place, we have to understand the crippling effects of the embargo. That is just one aspect. Cuba has always had this policy of internationalism, where, in spite of their meager resources, they have assisted countries around the world. They played a very significant part in the liberation of Southern Africa. And to fast forward into more modern times, in the last few decades, they have been assisting particularly Caribbean states in just about all areas of development. They began issuing scholarships to Caribbean countries from about 1979, 1980s. And they have offered scholarships in all disciplines. And that has such an effect on the different Caribbean islands that if you were to do a check as to the effects of these professional training in all these Caribbean islands, you would find that Cuban graduates have occupied top positions in all areas of the economy of all these different countries. And so they have not ceased the attempts to have Cuba isolated, and they know that the Cuban medical brigade that are functioning in these many different Caribbean countries and around the world, that is one of Cuba's major income earner. And so at this point, they're trying now to cut off a significant income that the state, or the nation of Cuba enjoys from the services that they're offering to assist the medical health system around the Caribbean. And so they are, at this particular phase, in the last election in the United States, where the Secretary General, or the Secretary of State, that is the position in the US, that position is now occupied by a Cuban descendant, who has always been one of the strongest advocates against Cuba. And so he is now trying, and I'm sure there are going to be very other serious, very much more serious measures implemented against Cuba. And we know the effect, again, of the financial embargo that is placed, which prohibits Cuba from trading like a normal state with its neighbors. It has reached to the point where, well, the Cubans are themselves, they're innovative people, and they are trying to adjust at every point to these restrictions that have been imposed by the US government. And so this new attempt to clarify or to classify the Cuban Medical Brigade as human trafficking, it's just an attempt to further and justify what they have planned to finally see the demise of the Cuban regime. The situation in Cuba at the moment is dire. I live in there, I can tell you that it's a dire situation, because the embargo has really bitten into the social fabric, not just the economics. And so I think our position in the Caribbean so far, I am happy that most of the countries affected are standing firm with Cuba. They know the benefits of the medical system, the medical program that Cuba provides, and they are standing firm. And I do hope that they would be exposed for what they're trying to do. That is the US. And so I just hope that the Caribbean can hold their ground, and of course, well, we know that for the last 33 years at the General Assembly of the United Nations, that a resolution has been passed overwhelming, but they can't say overwhelming, of the 190 odd countries in the world, 187 have voted in favor of the lifting of the embargo, which is really and truly the most important factor in freeing up Cuba to do exactly what their potential permits them to do in a free world, free trade. And so that's for now what I would really want to say in terms of the geopolitical relationship between the US and the Caribbean. And that the US, who consider us their backyard, they consider Cuba as their backyard. I don't even want to go into the question of when the world was brought to the brink of a nuclear war back in the 60s. Because they insisted that nobody is to come into their space and to threaten their national security, as the way they put it. So I do hope that the Caribbean, CARICOM in particular, hold their ground on the question of the assistance that they are getting from the Cuban Medical Brigade. It is nothing like what they're purporting the system to be involved with. It is a straight question of Cuba assisting in an area which they are more than qualified to do. And so, at this point, I would just like to end until we can get some maybe questions from the floor. Thank you very much.
And thank you as well. A round of applause, please, for Ambassador George Goodwin, Antigua Barbuda's ambassador to the Republic of Cuba, especially focusing on the threats against the Cuban Medical Brigade and the concerns from the US, indicating that it is forced labor or human trafficking, a position that was reiterated by Secretary of State Marco Rubio during his three-nation visits to the Caribbean between Wednesday and Thursday. We'll of course get questions a bit later on from the panel, from the audience of the panel. Let's get our final panelist to make his presentation. Professor C. Justin Robinson is Principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies Five Islands campus, a distinguished professor of econometrics, and also history buff as well. Professor loves history. And so he'll give us historical context and historical perspective on the nature of what we're seeing now and what possibly portends for the future. And crucially, Professor Robinson will explain, as a professor of econometrics, what this will mean for consumers if these policies take effect and in terms of the price increases and how they will pass down to consumers. Over to Professor C. Justin Robinson. A round of applause for him, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Pleasant good afternoon. I know I'm competing post-lunch and we shan't eat into too much valuable Friday evening drinking time, but I'm trying. I'm of the view that the world is seeing what is a significant shift. And in terms of what I call Trump 2.0, I think we can see shifts in 5 significant domains. So in terms of foreign policy, I think we are seeing a definite shift from multilateralism, countries getting around the world, countries of the world getting together in various forums and discussing things and coming to consensus, to really a unilateral approach to dealing with foreign policy. The US is going to deal with countries and pursue it in a very unilateral manner. And then what I also see is very transactional. So no sense of a brotherhood of nations, the traditional diplomatic niceties. What have you done for me lately? what can you do for me tomorrow? So it's really a very unilateral, very transactional. In terms of trade, and certainly for me as an economist, it's really quite interesting to see this in my lifetime, where the United States has been the champion of free trade. But we have seen now a shift from free trade to protectionism. This is really very clear with the tariffs as the major method, done in a very unilateral, bilateral way. And the target is China. Behind all of these, we see a strong anti-China. Immigration, another major shift. The US, the country with the Statue of Liberty, open arms. We've now moved from open borders to mass deportations, detention expansion, immigration bans, a major shift. Culture. And in many ways, many of us in academia, the US has amassed a lot of what we call soft power. It is the dominant culture in the world. We take it for granted. Any room you go into the world, you turn on CNN, we are watching all of these American movies, American products. But there's a massive culture shift in the US. So again, anti-DI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a particularly white nationalist identity agenda in the US. And also I think importantly on the political front, there's been a significant shift in terms of governance, where the Trump administration stands for the primacy, supremacy of the executive branch. Doesn't really seem to recognize separation of executive and judiciary. So a very strong executive, dismantling of federal agencies, loyalty first hiring as distinct from competency based. What I find in many ways interesting, and I guess I might say troubling, is while we associate this with the personality of Donald Trump, I think what many miss is that this is really not as much about Trump as people think. There are significant institutions in the US providing the ideological backing for a lot of this. So very little of what the Trump administration does surprises me, because there are public policy documents outlining this agenda. So there's the Heritage Foundation, and I encourage diplomats, wider Antiguans, go on these websites. There's the Heritage Foundation, the America First Policy Institute, Claremont Institute, Hillsdale College. These are very well-funded, prominent institutions that are providing the intellectual backing. And there are faces to this. So when you see or hear a Trump executive order, it is really coming out of an ideological, very well thought out, clear agenda coming out of these entities. Again, there are intellectuals at the front of this, Stephen Miller, people like Peter Navarro, economic advisor, Harvard trained, Michael Anton, political philosopher. So this is not simply about Trump. There is a strong intellectual structure around what he's doing. In many ways, he is the face of this. Now, in my opinion, why is this happening and now? I think this has a lot to do with that shift in trade and shift in power. So if I were to ask the audience, what percentage of the world's population would you think the United States accounts for? Any guesses? The percentage of the world's population that the United States accounts for? 12%. So, I've never seen an estimate of the US population for more than 6% of global population. So if you think about it, and many of us like to start the discussion from, say, 1948, post-World War II. The United States, with 6% of the world's population, really accounted for almost 50% of global GDP, almost 50% of global trade. So you have this tiny sliver of the world's population producing this massive quantity of the world's output and trade. Now, if we fast forward to 2024, we have seen a massive change. Whereas the US is now about 4% of the world's population, their share of global GDP and global trade has been cut by around half by most estimates. So in many ways, the United States is trying to figure it. So I see the Trump administration, this intellectual response, they're trying to figure out, how do we as a country that has always been top dog, are you really dominating the world, how do we now fit into a world where we can't take our dominance for granted? Do we try to be a first among equals, or do we try to restore that hegemonic position? So I think the Trump administration, his victory, that intellectual support behind him, is one US response as they seek to figure out this new world order and how they fit in. So clearly the Trump administration is America first. How do we stop the advance of China and even reverse it? How do we reestablish the United States as the dominant player? So in many ways, I'm not sure this can necessarily be as temporary as we think. It may be, but certainly I think it's useful for us to understand it, that we are trying to figure out this new world that we are in. But Trump is also a reflection of the United States trying to reflect how it's going to navigate a new world order. I think it's going to continue to be disorderly because I don't think they can restore anything near to the post-1948 world. I think a country like China, once it industrializes, it's going to be a major player. And I don't want to overstate the point, but I want people to come away with the notion that the United States, in its modern conception, has never had a rival in the form of China. A technological rival, an economic rival, a military rival. It's never experienced, and it doesn't know how to deal with that. I sort of think of it as, you're playing in a football league and you're accustomed to beat everybody 10-0. You just show up. But suddenly now there are teams that can beat you. You have to play well. And they're actually not sure how to navigate this new space. So I think this experimentation of policy in the US as it seeks to navigate this new environment will continue. So from us in the Caribbean, I think we're in a very difficult position with this administration. They clearly have adopted that ancient Greek, I think it was Thucydides who said, the strong take what they can and the weak suffer what they must. And that's really how they're approaching dealing with the rest of the world. We don't have a lot of cards to play with. We don't have a lot of levers to bargain with. And in many ways, it'd be interesting to hear from the diplomats how you want to navigate this. I mean, my own sense is, I think Webster really captured it well. We have to stand on principle. We have to be guided by this international charters we signed up to. But at a pragmatic level, we might also need to hunker down and not draw unnecessary attention to ourselves. And those are my opening remarks, and hopefully we can have some more come out in the discussion.
Another round of applause, please, for Professor Robinson. I was ruminating on what he said about the cards, that the Caribbean doesn't have many cards to play with. There's a reference that was made very recently in the White House, in the Oval Office, that a certain president was told, "You have no cards." And the next president said, "Mr. President, I'm not playing cards." Well, it's the world we live in. It's a reality that we have to confront. And so, ladies and gentlemen, for the next 15 minutes, as you heard Professor Robinson indicate, that, and I'm pretty sure that's the view of the entire panel, we don't want to keep you away from your weekend activities too long. Know that you're looking forward to the weekend. Cheers to the weekend. So we will keep this very tight in terms of the question and answer discussion. The focus, of course, of the question and answer discussion, of course, if you have any other points, but in terms of what impact this will have if these policies are fully implemented. Some of them are proposals at this point. For example, the proposal from the U.S. Trade Representative for up to $1.5 million fine or tariff on Chinese-built ships entering or docking at U.S. ports, and of course impacts on us here in the Caribbean. In relation to, there's a proposal or thought in the Trump administration about enhanced visa restrictions on countries with CIPs. So those are some of the crucial issues which are proposals. But of course, what has already been implemented are tariffs. Some have already been implemented. More will be implemented on the 2nd of April, which President Trump has called Liberation Day. And there will also be, of course, there's also been the implementation of the 25% tariff on countries with trade or purchase oil and gas from Venezuela. All right, so the floor is open, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I see my distinguished friend. The microphone, please wait for the microphone, please. We'll get it right. So we'll use this microphone, thanks. And because we're also online and also broadcasting, could you just indicate your name and the position you represent?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Brian Challenger, Special Responsibility for Civil Aviation. Let me first of all start by thanking the panelists for extremely thought-provoking and informative discourse. I wanted to, being facetious now, but in terms of the Professor Justin Robinson, I noticed he used, in looking at the Trump administration, the term the strong intellectual. The term intellectual hardly comes to us when we think of President Trump, so I would prefer to use the term strong ideological, but that's just by the way. I really appreciated the 5 points, which were actually 6 that he went through. But this one is really to our distinguished foreign minister, and it's just a question. We haven't really heard anything definitive of what has come out of the visit of Secretary of State Rubio. I don't know if you have any insights that you want to share with us, particularly on some of those very pressing issues that we require clarity on. Thank you.
We have not heard anything specifically. We await CARICOM convening a meeting next week to get the feedback from the representatives. But what you notice is that Secretary Rubio is very careful, the U.S. that is, in inviting the oil-rich countries of the Caribbean. It was Trinidad, oil-rich. It was Trinidad, Guyana, Suriname. So it is clear that there is no room for small island working states. The other prime ministers who were invited were Andrew Holness of Jamaica, and we all know how that works. Jamaica has been a very close ally of the United States, perhaps the closest in all of CARICOM. It may not be a comment that Jamaica would like to hear, but I can say without fear of contradiction that I've been foreign minister of this country for the last 7 years, 6.5 years, and on every occasion, Jamaica has proven its closeness with the USA, and vice versa. We also saw the invitation to the CARICOM chair, Mayor Motley, but that again is a matter of office. So we await the feedbacks. We would have seen in Jamaican media certain comments specific to Jamaica's relations with Cuban health workers, but we are still waiting to hear something comprehensive which could inform a Caribbean-wide position.
Thank you very much, Minister Green. Minister Green, I think in your presentation earlier, you were careful to say that you had been advised or asked gently to be a little bit diplomatic in terms of your comments. I suppose Ambassador Challenger, well, he hit the bouncer. He hooked. Yes, he went for it. So Ambassador Challenger, thank you. He was pulling no punches, right? All right. So any other question for the panel? Yes, I have High Commissioner Karen Mayhill, this country's High Commissioner to the UK. Could you turn on, please? High Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Garfield, and thank you to the panel. There was one area that I haven't heard anyone touch on. Professor Robinson went closest to it, and I think we do need to bring this into the discussion. There is an assumption that persons who vote for particular parties have a particular level of intellect. I think we need to debunk that. What we're seeing in Europe, also in America, is that these governments are taking their mandates from the people. The people hold elections, and they are giving very clear and strong mandates that we say moving in a particular direction. It's going further and further right. And we need to try to understand what are the underlying issues that are driving people, evangelicals in the US, people across Europe, to increasingly show their displeasure with what they call the establishment by electing governments that some may see as right-wing and others may see are actually just normal governments exposing normal things like border security and ensuring that their citizens are okay, that you're not having an immigration policy, for example, that's impoverishing everybody because it's putting the strain on social services, on roads, because it's too rapid, it's too much over a short period of time. There's a book I read recently, The Strange Death of Europe, by Douglas Murray, who's a really prolific thinker, I think, around the issues affecting the world today and what we're seeing in the West. The Strange Death of Europe tells a story, in his view, of where Europe was going to be today, and he wrote that book 10, 15 years ago, and we're seeing what he predicted happening today, and we're seeing the results in the governments that we see. What I want the panel to help me to understand is how people into societies that these governments are in, whether it's Brazil, well Bolsonaro is not there anymore, but you look at Hungary, you look at Germany, you look at France, you see the movement of people towards a particular type of ideology that says the nation state, and individuals within the nation state, require more dominance and more attention, and they're not getting it from the establishment. And are we underestimating and ignoring what people are saying to their governments and saying to the world about what they want to see in politics?
Thank you, High Commissioner. And of course, while you wanted that for that answer to come from Professor or anyone? Okay, so any member of the panel? He's volunteering, you ambassador. He's volunteering.
When the ball is swinging, you got to stay there.
I was thinking the professor should answer that, really. But no, I do think, High Commissioner and colleagues, your question is it's a question that has been asked by all of the intellects and the political talking heads in the United States during the election. And as you're right, we're seeing all over Europe, especially amongst the national, I almost want to say, amongst the population of those societies that are native to those countries, more or less. You are seeing that type of trend. And I think we heard this question raised since shortly after the Obama election victory, and shortly after the Obama government came out of office, because people asked the question whether governments were not hearing the voice of the man on the street. And there was this main discussion about Main Street and High Street. I think I think there is a clear. One of the things in democracy is that people vote. No matter what you say, people vote their stomachs. They vote for themselves. And we know that if people are feeling pressure, they're going to be voting in other ways. If you feel that you're not being heard, you're going to make your voice. That is that is democracy. So I think we are in a phase in our history where we are going to see changes in political changes in the response to government. In the 1990s, Bill Clinton and his government came into office with a different response, a more centric response to the population need at the time. The same thing with Tony Blair. We then saw shifts, keep moving, if you might, keep moving right after that period. And I think we are in that period now throughout Europe where populations are changing, where in the United States population pressures are changing. and you are seeing the population, I hate to say of the right, but it would seem that way, who is consistently trying to pull it towards that and get back to where they were 30 years ago, 40 years ago, because those populations feel under threat. And the governments that they vote are the governments who are speaking in that direction. I agree with the professor. It's not about Trump at all. Trump is the figurehead entity in this whole thing. It is far more powerful behind Trump. We talked about Project 25, and the professor outlined a number of the right-wing organizations in the United States, and Brian, indeed, they are intellectual. They are very much so. But some of the changes, and I had conversations recently with folks in DC, and some of the changes that are impacting upon some of these organizations. As an example, the Democratic Progress, which is a right-wing or conservative organization, they just sued the government because with the changes, they almost had to close their offices, all of their offices. ICNL, the International Center for Nonprofit Law, had to lose 50% of their staff. And organizations that are far more right have lost more because of the philosophy of less government control, more free marketing, and that gives you the understanding, High Commissioner. If you remove the structures of government to support the population and you have a free market, then and it's totally free market, who then rises to the top?
Let me add my voice to the question asked. And I do not want to suggest that my esteemed colleague from New York is being diplomatic. Okay, my colleague from English Harbor. But what we're seeing, my constituent, what we're seeing here, let's admit it, let's call it by its real name. It's racism on the rise. A rose by any other name is still a rose. And so as we witness this global phenomenon, right-wing ascendancy in Europe, South America, the Trump regime in the US, with both ideological and academic underpinnings, we have got to fashion our own diplomatic engagement to deal with the issues that confront us. And so how do we deal, when we ask, with issues of climate vulnerabilities? How do we deal with issues of economic diversification and investment opportunities in the face of this changing scenario in the geopolitical space? That, I think, is quintessentially what we are called upon to do. We can fashion or answer to the thoughts of those who are giving fascism or neo-fascism a rise in Europe. We can speak to what's happening in countries like Argentina and South America. We certainly have to relate to all of them, and especially the one in North America, in the US of A. And so it's about us understanding our own interests and fashioning a diplomatic policy prescription that addresses our interests whilst working with that which is that over which we have absolutely no control. It therefore requires strategic planning, diplomatic engagements of a different level. I spoke of it yesterday. I spoke about diplomats who embody the nation's ideals, the nation's interests. It's no longer simply being well-dressed and well-spoken. It's about understanding the issues and being able to relate to them to the extent that our country finds its place ekes out its place within this global space. I'm speaking about multilateralism, where we conflate our interests with those of other small and emerging nations to the extent that we have a voice. We have to find the numeric value. Inviting guest speakers from the African continent was not coincidental. It's a very powerful and deliberate message that we are sending from this small shore of Antigua and Barbuda. That we understand that the numeric value of Africa and the Caribbean congealing, working in the international space, in the multilateral arena, is what we need to combat the threats that we currently face. How do we defend our sovereignty? How do we protect international law? Alone we cannot do it. And so as we leave this very important coming together of Antigua and Barbuda diplomats, the idea of multilateralism must resonate and resonate strongly and be a beacon, a guide, a guidepost in the service we provide to our country. The dynamics of today's geopolitics is quite different. But again, if I may just go back to answer the question that was asked, and to let us not dance around it, tiptoe around it, or pretend not to understand it. It is racism and fascism on the rise. We can't control it. We see these nationals voting in Europe, all these right-wing regimes. And listen, let's go back. Let's get a little historical perspective here. Once Obama left the White House, we heard it. Once Obama left the White House, we heard it. That not another one like him will go there again. And with that change, with that we saw all the changes that we're now witnessing beginning. So my dear colleagues, through your question, High Commissioner Hill, you have asked us to do a reality check. And with that question, with that reality check, we are now in a place where we better understand where we are and what we're called upon to do. Again, I don't want to recap. Strategic diplomacy is what I encourage at this stage. Sustainable development is our mission. We have to deal with the question of education and human capital development. If we're going to counter that which we're now witnessing, the training of our human index is so quintessentially important if we are going to be able to navigate these turbulent waters. If we're going to have persons who can pit their skills, intellectual skills, against those in Washington, who, as Professor Wright said, are the ones driving this new US approach. Not Donald Trump, he's the face of it. It is deeper, far, far deeper than Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, there are times when Donald Trump cannot carry a message himself. And we see that. But the message is ideological as much as it is academic.
Well, I don't think I have much to add to that, but just to, the standard economic textbook answer to Ambassador's question is, with globalization, you have winners and losers. And that the argument is that some of the major losers have been what you might call middle America, persons who had these jobs in the manufacturing sector, etc. They are the ones who have lost out to globalization. These are the angry white men, as some people. So it's just all quite intermingled. So I think some of that disaffection is coming from the economic reorganization coming out of globalization. I guess in terms of the standard economic textbook, we sort of think we have an answer to that doesn't really involve what this administration is doing. That companies in the US are now making massive profits. And that's one of the points I actually wanted to get across today because I don't often get a chance to talk to audiences like this. We often frame trade in terms of US versus China, Russia. One of the first things we try to get our students to understand, countries do not trade. Okay, companies trade. So all of these exports from China to the US, these are American companies that have chosen for a variety of reasons to locate their production facilities in China and are sending these goods back. So I think that's something we need to be very careful. It's companies that are making these decisions, not countries. So all these tariffs, again, they are very intentional. Okay, they're saying, okay, if you want to avoid the tariffs, then come and produce behind the tariff wall. So all of these measures are designed to induce companies around the world to locate their production within the United States and hopefully trigger this manufacturing revival and create all of these blue-collar jobs and the persons who line up at the MAGA convention. So this is very, very intentional. So I think a lot of policy is targeted at this group. And it's all tied up in racism, I think. I think, unfortunately, I guess as an economic historian, financial historian, we tend to take the view that the last 500-600 years is a very unusual period in the long sweep of human history, where Europeans and then Americans have dominated the world. But so my view is that the Americans and the Europeans have come to the conclusion, they take it for granted that they are entitled to a higher standard of living than anybody else in the world. And they are willing to turn to leadership, regimes, methods that allow them to continue to enjoy a higher standard of living than anybody else in the world. And this can get very dangerous. Because the only way we have seen through the thousands of years of human history we've studied to maintain that dominance it's only ever been maintained by military might. And it might not be surprising that we see greater flexing of military muscle, because it's been the only way to maintain your dominance over other people. So I think we are in a very dangerous phase. Read some history. Multilateralism is very new. I mean, one of the first things I was taught in courses in cultural anthropology was it's very normal for you as a human to assume that the world you grow up in is normal. This is how it's meant to be. This is right. But if you do the sweep of human history, what is normal changes, you know? I mean, the kind of licks I get as a child, I can't give them to my children. I mean, just how you discipline children, we have seen how that norm has changed in my short lifetime. So this multilateralism that we are so committed to, we should not take it for granted. It's really less than 100 years old if you really think about it. So I think we need strategic planning. We need scenario planning. We actually need to be planning for many different scenarios, because where this goes, I think is anybody's guess. But we have a group of very powerful countries that are determined to hold on to their dominant position by any means necessary.
Let me make three little comments. One, based on something on the professor's discourse, but what he was saying about companies and so on is exactly the point that I was referring to in that discussion, where we are rushing to be the first to pass that law on competition. Think of the impact on small Antigua. So I think that is, for me, very important. The question of multilateralism and its being new is another area for greater discussion, because what I think we should be doing, I think Martin referred to it yesterday in his presentation, and which is something that he and I had been talking about, and a couple of us at the UN. We as small states and small islands, in our work using the concept of multilateralism, we should not wait to be told for the new agenda to be set. We suffered from the last time that happened. We ought to have learned from that, and we should be setting where we want to go and then work with others to get there. Because we have more nations together than we have apart. There are 39 small states. We can be picked off if we fall into the trap of transactional politics. But we have to survive, recognizing that if our sovereignty is to mean anything, we have to work together. And the Caribbean, more so than ever, needs to realize that and not break itself into transactional politics to be pulled apart. And that's, Professor, the discussion we could have.
Absolutely. Very, very good points raised by the panel. Let me, so two final questions. One from one from my good friend Garfield. My namesake, Garfield Joseph. Over to you, and then we'll take one more question as we wrap this section.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. As I reflected on the discourse that we've had, I think I just wanted to share something for consideration. From my perspective, I think the starting point is to define our reality. We recognize that the reality in which we live today is significantly different. And there are two questions that really come to mind. What should we start doing that we were never doing before? And what should we stop doing? One of the things that I think we need to do better, small island developing states, more so Antigua and Barbuda, is that I think we need to have more crisis-like collaboration, right? When there's a crisis, people get together so that they can discuss ideas, plan, collaborate. I think among this group, even at the national level, what is required is crisis-like collaboration. And for me, simply put, what are the top 3 things we need to start doing or stop doing? It cannot be business as usual in light of the current challenges that we are seeking. I close with this reflection. For me, I think the starting point, we know our sentiments, right? We know our feelings and we know what's driving the agenda. But the key question is, where and how can we find common ground? I think that's the starting point. And something comes to mind, a lot of folks may not know this, but we face not the same magnitude of a situation, but something similar. When the cruise line doing the port, we wanted to raise the head tax, and there was a threat that if we raise the head tax, they'll pull out. And there was a negotiation that took place. I can share with you that what was even contemplated as the proposition of a small $2 head tax that may have seemed outrageous, the recommendation was to go and ask for 6, 7, right? And you get more sometimes than what you really deserve. Are you with me? By making bold requests. So to my mind, we face a crisis now, and it gives us the opportunity within this group to be able to have crisis-like collaboration, seek common grounds. I mean, the locus of power is on the other side. That is the reality. And to the degree that you don't give up on your values remain the same, but the starting point and what matters we can agree. I feel the impact. I close now. There are 2 persons. We had an OAS program. Person was in Dominica supporting women in entrepreneurship. She lost her contract as a result of Doge and other things that are happening. So what do? Do we curse the darkness? No, we just have to find a way to be able to do more with less resources. So those would be my reflections on the challenges we face at this time.
Thank you very much, Garfield. I think very, very insightful contribution. I'm pretty sure the head table will be able to respond as well, Garfield, to your points. We can take one final question as we have final comments as well. One final question. On the matters of economics, what I also want to ask the audience, while they're also responding to Garfield, is this question. Everything comes down to the economy. James Carville said it's economy stupid in the 1995, the early 90s campaign for Bill Clinton. How will this impact on the economy, and what can be done to avert some of those challenges? That's one. And along the lines of the theme of this diplomatic encounter, alignment of diplomatic outreach with national priorities, how will the Foreign Service, and this one specifically for Minister Green, how will the Foreign Service pivot to ensure that the country aligns its foreign policy? Who will it engage with? Will it be more, will it be deeper South-South cooperation? Will it be more engagement with the Global South to ensure that foreign policy can reflect the new environment and also can protect Antigua and Barbuda's national interest? Over to you.
Thank you, Garfield. I think we witnessed over the last day and a half presentations focusing on key and critical elements of our own national agenda. And so, to answer your question in more direct fashion, we will now have to work on pulling together the threads of the various presentations reflecting national interests and to cull them into policy positions. And so there's no single answer I can give to you today because the scribes are still working, putting together the thoughts of the various panelists. But it's clear, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, that the presentations made over the last day and a half are all reflective of matters of interest to the state. That's why when I spoke just a while ago in my last intervention, I spoke to the whole question of strategic diplomacy. That is perhaps the nutshell word I can give as a takeaway from us aligning our diplomatic work with national perspective or national realities. The whole question of climate change, that is perhaps the single largest geopolitical threat we have. Because that is existential. If we don't get that dealt with and cleared up, our tomorrow is not certain. And so all the other things will be built around that particular core position. The whole question of our economy, ensuring that we continue to have diplomats who can speak to and represent the interests of the national economy, our national development needs, and to do all of these things within the framework of our belief in the multilateral system. And so I think I've given an idea as to how we will treat with the outcome document from this two-day retreat. It is really a conflation of the issues and working through the details to fashion a revised position of Antigua and Barbuda as relates to our position in the world, defending, protecting, securing and ensuring the interests of our people are served and protected.
All right, thank you so much, Minister. Let me just get a final point. I'm going to get all the panelists to give me 1 minute responses, their final comments, but let me just get a quick response from Professor Robinson on the issue of Antigua and Barbuda's what should the modus operandi now in terms of the economy? Because there are certainly significant challenges facing the economy if these policies were to be implemented, especially in relation to consumer prices and how those will go up from tariffs, from the charge on consumer, from the charge on Chinese-built ships, etc. So a point on what needs to be done in relation to priorities to avert some of the worst challenges for Antigua and Barbuda's economy.
So, I mean, that's a tough question in the sense that we can't escape our geography. This is what makes this so difficult. We are where we are. You know, Columbus thought we were some islands off of China. We are islands off America. So trade flows are really driven a lot by geography. So this transition from these policies, it's going to be painful for the United States, as they are already experiencing, and we see it in the stock market and other areas. It's also going to be difficult for us. And I think in answering that question, I think it's important that we internalize that there is no quick fix. There is no quick, painless solution to these trade patterns, which are really defined by our geography. But clearly we have to look at, so I think my first point is always, first, do no harm. And I think that this is where our diplomats and foreign policy is important, that we don't engage in unnecessary self-harm. We don't attract unnecessary attention to ourselves. You know, decide, because I hear people in my circle say, well, the Mexicans blinked when they sent additional soldiers to the border. But Mexico can't escape its geography. So in terms of the impact of those tariffs relative to sending some troops to the border, you have to make those sensible, pragmatic choices. That's what we elect ministers and others to make these, which may not be popular choices. So I think we don't want to engage in any unnecessary self-harm, get on any unnecessary soapboxes, and draw unnecessary attention to ourselves. And then our only other option really is to explore, I think as the Minister said, we started, explore really alternative arrangements, partnerships with other hemisphere, other parts of the world, alterations in your supply chain, sourcing your goods differently, but with an understanding that none of this is cheap or painless. Business people exist to make maximum profits, and our current supply chains are one of the most efficient currently. So as we shift from them, it is not going to be costless, but it may be less costly than dealing with what is coming from the US. And also importantly, the uncertainty. I think this is really one of the big challenges with the Trump administration, that other supply chains may be more expensive, but they may just be more reliable, because you do need that element of certainty. So staying under the radar, as Antigua said, don't look no trouble. You know, trouble is coming for you, so don't add to it by looking any more trouble. Try to stay under the radar, but also explore these different supply chain routes. But also be very clear-minded. This is not cheap. This is not painless. You know, we have the Commonwealth. There are other places that we have this commonality with, so we need to begin to make those shifts. But it's not a quick, easy fix.
All right, I think that everybody can agree with you. Yes, Ambassador Goodwin, that's a very quick point.
Yes, what I think we need to do is to be true to our principles and be guided by those, be guided by the rules of international law, be guided by our principle of multinationalism, and engage with whoever that we think is beneficial for our country.
That's a fair point. All right, let me start with, let me start with Minister for his final comments. If Minister, if you could keep it to a minute and a half max, please.
Well, I think I would have said enough over the last 2 days. And for example, I did not accept the invitation to do the AI, even though I do it internationally with the panel. For the same reason, I don't want to appear to be hugging the stage. I want to hear more from the diplomats. They're the ones who are in the field, they're the ones who are doing the work. And so I just want to express my delight, my pleasure to be a part of this panel. As we close, to commend all the persons who work behind the scenes to make it happen. And certainly the takeaway from this encounter is quintessential, is important, because as I said earlier, we are in changing times, and our own way of doing things has to reflect that we understand what's happening around us.
Thanks, Minister. Over to Ambassador. Indeed, thank you. Ambassador Webson, for his final comments.
I think Ambassador Goodwin sort of and brought it together in his last comments for us. Because I think clearly for small island states, for Antigua and Barbuda, the minister pointed out where our challenges are with climate change and so on. But international law, we have to stick with a rule-based system. We have to use international law and our principles in the rule-based system as our focal point for diplomacy and for discussions. We have to believe that our sovereignty is based on equality for every state. It's based on each of us understanding and respecting each other and working together with our blocks, whether these blocks are CARICOM or South-South. We recognize, and the professor is right, and I've said that at the UN several times, no matter what we are, what we think, we can't lift up Antigua and move it. We are here. We love the geography that it gives. We also have to live with the challenges and heartaches that we face, because that's what it is. We will always get climate, hurricane, and so on. So I believe our principles on international law in a rules-based system and defending multilateralism is the only place where we have a global voice, and that's how we should use it, irrespective of whom we speak to stand on principle, we will be fine. We will be fine. I did not say we will not have pain, but we will be fine.
All right, fine with pain. Thank you so much, Dr. Webster. Over to Ambassador Goodwin. Just quickly, just your final point. Quickly, your final point. A minute, please.
Oh yeah, I thought that was my final comment I
Okay,
made.
well,
after.
you can certainly give it.
Yes.
You can, okay, so you had your final points. And Professor Robinson?
You know,
In a minute.
no,
Okay, good. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, our panel, another round of applause for them, please. Minister Green, Honorable E.P. Chet Green, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Trade and Barbados Affairs, Professor C. Justin Robinson, UA5 Islands Campus Principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor, Ambassador George Goodwin, Ambassador to Cuba, and Ambassador Dr. Aubrey Webster, Permanent Representative to the... Indeed. Of course, Dr. Aubrey Webster is a permanent representative to the United Nations. It has been a fantastic discussion. Of course, it continues because the issues that small island states face will continue. But again, as we indicated at the start, we end as we began. This is not a situation where this country and other small island states have no agency. There is agency, and we can do what we can to adjust the sails on the ship of state to assist in avoiding the worst storms, even though there is no safe harbor to be found. You heard from the panel, it might not be painless, but we'll be fine. As Ambassador Dr. Robeson says, we'll be fine, but there might be some pain. I will leave you with the words of Brutus again as we started. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures. So we must strike now, we must move and act decisively now to ensure that as much as possible, we can avert the worst of the impending storms. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been a fantastic audience. Give yourselves a round of applause as we thank our audience as well online. Thank you so much, really appreciate it. And we will continue with the diplomatic encounter, which is, the theme is aligning national priorities with, or alignment of diplomatic outreach with national priorities. Thank you so much.